Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to tell you how exactly you can find the best workout split using the simple three-step, what I like to call PEP method. Now I'm going to explain the PEP method in just a second, but I want to first talk about what the PEP method is actually based on. The PEP method is based on you. A lot of people, when they talk about splits and they talk about the best splits, what they're talking about, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, is their own personal experience. It's kind of like when people talk about diets, right? You ask 20 really jacked people what they eat, and yeah, a couple of them may overlap closely, but most of them probably eat very differently, whether it's the specific foods, the meal timing, the time of day that they eat in terms of, are they more of like a morning person? Do they eat most of their food in the morning or at night? And so all of these really strong claims seem to be conflicting until you realize that like, oh, everyone is actually different. Same thing with digestibility. And so when we think about training, for whatever reason, we tend to shut our brains off. And instead of recognizing that each person is speaking through their own filter, through their own experience, we just think that there are very hard rules around what's the best split for everyone. And is it push-pull legs? Is it upper lower? And the reality is that clearly all of these things work. So herein lies the magic to the PEP method, okay? So the PEP method basically is a method that puts all the responsibility on you as the person who actually needs to start to pay attention to you. And it's based on this really cool strategy, which is basically ignoring what everyone else says and paying attention to what you think and paying attention to what you like over time. Okay, so what is the PEP method? Let's get to it. So the first P, can anyone guess? Is the split practical? Okay, this is the first and most important, which is why it's first in the sequence here of PEP. It's the first and most important because people will ask, hey, what split should I do, Ben? And the first question I always say is, well, what can you actually do and what are you willing to do? So for example, if you are a new parent and you are sleeping 4 hours a night or less, and you work a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, is it particularly practical for you to say, I'm going to do a push-pull leg split wherein each of those days is a 2 to 3 hour training session? Probably not. So the person that's going to tell you to do push-pull legs, despite all this practical stuff that's in the way, has no idea that you have all these practical limitations, right? The random dude or chick on the internet who's like, you got to do push-pull legs for the growth or else you're not going to see the growth. Or you need to do 2 times a week, 3 times a week frequency to see the growth or else you're not going to see it. So the first thing is it practical? Can you actually abide by the schedule that you set forth? Figure it out over time. You don't have to get it perfect on paper first. Take a guess, all right? If you're new to training, maybe start with twice a week, maybe full body. Just see how it goes. Just experiment. Again, the responsibility, I'm putting it on to you. The responsibility should not be on other people who have no idea what the context of your life is at any given time to tell you like this is best for you or I think this is best for everyone sort of within the constraints of what kind of life you're living. So ask yourself, what is practical? What is a really low bar for me? If you think you can train 5 times a week, start with 4. If you think you can train 4 times a week, start with 3, right? Just start low, start the bar low, and assess how that's sort of working for you over time and whether or not it feels frictionless, right? As the key word is just the frictionlessness of the split. Is it something that you can actually practically abide by? First and most important, because time is our greatest constraint. If you don't have the time to do a split, you're going to feel like, oh man, I didn't get that 5th day, and you're going to start to you're going to start to lack motivation. You're going to start to lose enjoyment if you were initially experiencing it. So make sure it's practical. Okay. Number 1. Number 2, do you enjoy it? Is it enjoyable? Because if it's practical, right? So you're doing great on step number 1. that's awesome. But if you don't enjoy it, whether it be the specific way that you split up the days, whether it be the proximity of days, are you sort of forced to do 3 days in a row? Is there maybe somewhere you can take a rest day between those days? Whether it's the specific exercises that you're doing because someone else told you that you had to do certain exercises, you could be doing theoretically the best split in the world for you. But if you're picking exercises within the constraints of that split that you hate or that you feel uncomfortable doing simply because someone else told you to do them, then it's not going to be sustainable. So another sort of replacement word for this would be sustainable, right? Because if something is enjoyable, it's usually sustainable. Again, much like a diet. If you create very hard, very strict rules, if someone says, hey, you have to eat steak and potatoes every single night for dinner, but you don't like steak and potatoes, how long are you going to be able to do that? I don't know, me personally, I love steak and potatoes, so I could do that forever, but someone next door might not be able to do that for a single day, okay? So is it practical? Number one, constraints of time, most important. Is it enjoyable? Number two, second most important. If it's practical, but it's not enjoyable, we don't even think about the third one, okay? If it's not practical, we don't even really think about the enjoyment factor, right? So what's number three? Are you making progress? Okay? So there's an R in between there, okay? I didn't misspell that. So progress is the third one. Now, progress is the last one in this order because so many people are worried about creating and maintaining progress before they have found something that is both practical and enjoyable. And so if you're sitting there thinking, well, Ben, I just like, can't you just provide some practical recommendations for me? Number one, no, I can't provide practical recommendations for you because I don't know what your life is like. Again, if you're a busy new father or mother, or if you're a teenager and it's your first year in college and you have 6 hours of free time every day to lift, like those are very two distinct situations. So you actually have to take on some of the responsibility and say to yourself, what is practical for me? What is enjoyable? And then am I able to make progress within the sort of constraints of something that is both practical and enjoyable? Now, there's a large obvious question here, which is how do you assess progress? And the answer is, well, progress can only be assessed retrospectively, which means that ultimately all of this stuff initially is a guess. You're not going to be able to write out a perfect plan on paper. You're not going to be able to write out a perfect diet on paper. And guess what? If perfect did exist, it might change over time. And so this is why you need to continually revisit these things. This is not like I do this once and it's done forever. It might be, you might be in a unique situation where for whatever reason, you're just someone who can do something and do it for, the next 40 years. But ultimately, this is something that is subject to change. And so there needs to be this constant cycle of analysis, reanalysis. Is it still practical? Is it still enjoyable? Am I still making progress? Whether progress comes through losing weight or gaining weight or adding muscle or getting stronger or a combination of all those things, you need to constantly be sort of cycling and recycling these things and assessing whether or not your program remains practical, remains enjoyable, and guess what? Most of the time, if it's both of these things, it also tends to be the case that people make progress, okay? So if you are missing any single one of these, if it's not practical, it's probably not gonna be enjoyable. Maybe it might be enjoyable because you enjoy the exercises, but you're certainly not gonna make progress if you're skipping workouts all the time based on the way you have it laid out. If it's not enjoyable, it's not gonna be sustainable, so therefore, in some ways, these two are very closely overlapping. And because it's not sustainable, it's going to be difficult to make progress. If it's practical and enjoyable, and it's like you feel good, you like the exercises you're doing, but you're not making progress, how sustainable really is it going to be? So where you draw the line between each of these three as a distinct category is sort of subject to your interpretation. But in my personal opinion, think about these things in this order. Don't just think about the entire split in this order. Think about the constraints of every day in this order. Okay, so if you're doing a leg day, and for whatever reason you just hate to do leg extensions first, don't do leg extensions first, put them last. We have all these sort of hyper-specific questions about exercise order and muscular bias and how many sets and how many reps and what is the tempo and how often should I do this, and no one is thinking and no one is talking about these things. So you need to take a personal inventory, you need to do it frequently, and you need to ask yourself, is it practical, is it enjoyable, and am I making progress? Because if you're missing any one of these three, your program in terms of the medium to long term is not going to be something that's probably going to work out for you. So I hope this perspective was helpful and potentially refreshing, because a lot of content creators are just very comfortable shoving very specific recommendations down people's throats. I'm not personally one of those people, at least now. I used to be, when I felt a lot less confident about my ability to teach these things. And so the more confident that I become, the less confident, in some ways, ironically, I become about giving particular recommendations. So I hope this motivates some of you to actually take some inventory and to stop just blindly turning your brains off and listening to what other people say. Which is kind of ironic, because I'm telling you to take inventory. But I hope you found this useful. And if you did, please subscribe to the channel, maybe share this video, really helps. And I'm really enjoying sort of making these whiteboard videos. And yeah, if you have any questions for me, check on the link in the description. You can join my free community. There's a ton of people in there, almost 2,000 people in there now. So please, please, please join in, ask some questions, engage with other people. There are a ton of super smart people in there that I'm constantly learning from every day. So I hope you see you there, and I'll see you all in the next video.